All right, folks. Well, hello, folks. Welcome to the urinary system. Just so you know, the chapter 26 and 27 are closely linked, and in fact, in some books, they're combined. And so, chapter 26 is the urinary system. Chapter 27 is water, electrolyte, and acid-base balance. And of course, the urinary system is intimately involved in water balance, electrolyte balance, and acid-base balance. So, you will get some of this material twice. By the time we get to chapter 27, you'll hear me repeating some of the things we covered in chapter 26, which is not necessarily a bad thing. All right, so this is the overview of the urinary system. Here we go.
The major functions of the urinary system are the removal of waste products from the body and the regulation of water and electrolyte balance. The organs of the urinary system are the kidneys, ureters, urinary bladder, and urethra. The kidneys are two symmetrical bean-shaped organs located along the posterior abdominal wall on each side of the vertebral column. Vessels, nerves, and a ureter connect to the medial surface of each kidney at the hilum. Blood to be filtered is transported to the kidney by the renal artery, and filtered blood leaves the kidney via the renal vein. A fibrous renal capsule covers the outer surface of the kidney. The kidney's interior consists of an outer renal cortex and an inner renal medulla. Extensions of the cortex, the renal columns, project into the medulla and subdivide it into renal pyramids. Fluid from the renal pyramids ultimately funnels into the renal pelvis of the ureter. Ureters are fibromuscular tubes that conduct urine from the kidneys to the urinary bladder. Each ureter begins as a renal pelvis and extends downward to the bladder. The presence of urine within the renal pelvis initiates peristaltic waves in the muscular layers of the ureters that propel urine through the ureters and into the urinary bladder. The urinary bladder is an expandable muscular container that serves as a reservoir for urine. It is positioned behind the pubic symphysis. Ureters enter the posterolateral wall of the urinary bladder through the ureteral openings. The bladder wall contains 3 layers of smooth muscle, collectively called the detrusor muscle. During urination or micturition, the detrusor muscle contracts to expel urine from the bladder. The bladder narrows toward its base, forming a constricted neck that is continuous with the urethra. The urethra is a fibromuscular tube that conveys urine from the bladder out of the body. The male urethra is roughly 4 times longer than the female urethra. Whereas the sole function of the female urethra is to transport urine to the outside of the body, the male urethra serves urinary and reproductive functions, acting as a passageway for both urine and semen. In both sexes, the detrusor muscle thickens at the neck of the bladder near the urethra to form an internal urethral sphincter. This ring of smooth muscle is under involuntary control. Where it passes through the urogenital diaphragm, the urethra is encircled by an external urethral sphincter composed of skeletal muscle, which is under voluntary control. During urination, both urethral sphincters relax, allowing urine to exit the body through the external urethral orifice.
All right, that's an overview of the urinary system. Now, this is just the anatomy, and I don't want to beat it to death because you did it in lab, but we'll talk about it a little bit. So you can see the kidneys here, and you can see that the right kidney is slightly lower than the left kidney, and that's in fact true for most of us. But I do want to tell you that we're giving you the average anatomy here because some people have one kidney, and now when I say that, I don't mean that one of these is missing. I mean that these two kidneys are connected. So in essence, it's one kidney, and they're connected across the center. Of some people, they have the reverse is true. The left kidney is lower than the right kidney. And there's some other modifications of the anatomy, but we give you the general anatomy here. So you can see the kidneys with the adrenal glands on top. You can see the ureters, and you can see the bladder and the urethra. And you can see the 3 functions of the urinary system right here: excretion, elimination, So, what's the difference between excretion and elimination? And here's the difference. You have removed the waste products from the body as soon as you uh, put those waste products in the filtrate. And the filtrate is in the tubules of the urine, which we're going to talk about. But you haven't eliminated that waste from the body until you urinate them out. And the difference is this. The tubules of the kidney go through what we call secretion and absorption, reabsorption. When you secrete, the bloodstream actually can transport molecules into the filtrate, ready to be urinated. And when you reabsorb, you can reabsorb filtered material in the filtrate back into your body. So it's not like the filtrate that you initially make is always going to be the final urine product. In fact, it better not be because you make about 180 to 200 liters of filtrate a day, but you only make about 2 liters of urine a day. So obviously we better be reabsorbing a lot of material here. Matter of fact, we reabsorb 99% of it. 2 liters is 1% of 200 liters. So we reabsorb 99% of our filtrate. But the bottom line is this. Getting the organic waste into the filtrate does not necessarily mean you get it out of the body. But the elimination is getting it out of the body. That's urinating. And then we have this whole homeostatic regulatory process that we're going to talk about. It's going to be partly nervous system. It's going to be hormones, and yeah, that's about it. Nervous system and hormones, yeah. So we'll talk about how the nervous system is involved in homeostatic regulation, and the nervous system and the kidneys, and we'll talk about how hormones in the kidneys are involved in homeostatic regulation. For example, erythropoietin and the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. So we'll talk about some of these hormones. All right. Again, just more anatomy here. And since you're looking at the back, you can see that the right kidney is lower than the left kidney. I was just making sure the two pictures were accurate. The right kidney is lower than the left kidney slightly, and you can see that there. If you're looking at this, you can see the spleen is on the left side. Yeah, you're looking downward. I always have to orient because sometimes they show you these cross-sectional pictures and you're looking upward. So obviously this is the back because that's the vertebrae and the spinal column. But you are looking downward. You've done a cross-section looking down because the spleen is on the left. And the only way this can be looking downward is the spleen being on the left. You can see your kidney right here. So that's a cross-section looking down. Very important here. You can see that the kidney is in the retroperitoneal area. So this is the peritoneum right here. Whoops. Just fixing my pen. Here's the peritoneum. And you can see that the kidney is behind it. So we say the kidney is retroperitoneal, but it is surrounded by this perinephric fat. There's a whole bunch of fat around the kidney, and that holds it in place, and there's some fascia there. So you can see that holding the kidney in place. More anatomy. I'm not going to go through all this. You did a lot of this in the lab.
The kidneys are large bean-shaped organs located in a retroperitoneal position on the posterior abdominal wall on either side of the vertebral column. The hilum is located along the concave medial border where blood vessels and nerves enter and exit the kidney. It also serves as the point of exit for the renal pelvis, which transports urine to the ureter. The hilum is continuous with an expanded area within the kidney known as the renal sinus. The kidney tissue is divided into an outer renal cortex and an inner renal medulla. Extensions of the cortex, called renal columns, project into the medulla between renal pyramids. The base of each pyramid is located at the junction of the cortex and medulla, the cortical medullary junction. The apex or tip of each pyramid, known as the renal papilla, projects into a funnel-shaped structure in the renal sinus called a minor calyx. Several minor calyces merge to form larger structures called major calyces, with each kidney containing 2 to 3 major calyces. Major calyces merge to form a single, funnel-shaped renal pelvis. A human kidney is divided into 8 to 15 lobes, each consisting of a renal pyramid with a renal column on each side, and the cortex external to the pyramid base. Blood is carried to each kidney for filtration through the renal artery. The renal artery branches in the renal sinus to form segmental arteries, which branch again to form interlobar arteries. Interlobar arteries pass through the renal columns to the cortical medullary junction, where they branch to form arcuate arteries. Arcuate arteries project along the base of renal pyramids to give off interlobular arteries that enter the renal cortex. Finally, each interlobular artery branches to form a series of afferent arterioles, each of which feeds a capillary network called a glomerulus. The glomerulus forms the vascular core of the renal corpuscle and is the initial filtering component of the kidney. The renal corpuscle and its associated ducts form the functional filtration unit of the kidney, the nephron. The efferent arteriole that leaves each glomerulus enters a second capillary network. For nephrons in the renal cortex, a peritubular capillary network forms around the proximal and distal convoluted tubules. From this capillary network, blood leaves the cortex by flowing into interlobular veins, which drain into arcuate and interlobar veins, and finally, the renal vein. Conversely, the efferent arterioles associated with nephrons at the cortical medullary junction enter a second capillary network along the nephron loop, or loop of Henle. These capillaries are known as the vasa recta. From the vasa recta, blood flows sequentially into interlobular, arcuate, and interlobar veins, and finally, the renal vein.
Okay, and that's it for 26-1.